In this video covering activity 4.5, we're going to discuss techniques to factor and solve quadratic equations. All right, so the first technique is considered the zero product principle. Okay, and really what it says is if we have A times B equals 0, either the A or the B has to result in 0. This kind of makes sense, right? So if I had 4 times x equals 0, right, the only way to make this true would be x has to be equal to 0, right? Or if I had x times 7 equals 0, right, you're thinking of this as A, think of this as your B. One of those items has to be 0, so the x would be 0, right? So that's what they're saying here. Right? If A times B is 0, either A is 0 or B is 0. So now they gave us an example, right? So we look at example 1. So think of this whole term x minus 2 as my A and the term x plus 3 as my B. So one of those has to result in 0, right? Either A has to be 0, B has to be 0, or they're both 0. Right? So how can I make this term A 0? Well, think about it. The value positive 2 for x would give me 0, right? If I had 2 minus 2, that would give me 0, and 0 times anything is 0. All right, so that would be one option, x equals 2. All right, what else could I do? What if b is 0, right? What value of x would make this b 0? Well, negative 3, right? If I had negative 3 plus 3, that would give me 0. So x equals negative 3 is my solution as well. Okay. What the book is showing you here is you can actually take each piece, your A, in this case, which was the x minus 2, and set it equal to 0. When you solve that, you end up with x equals 2, which is what we have here, right? And if you take this B piece and set it equal to 0, when you solve this for x, you end up with x equals negative 3, which is what we have here. Okay, and by the way, we can use our calculator to test what we've done. If we press y equals and we graph what we're given, so let me clear out whatever I have in here. And you see how we're given this x minus 2 in parentheses, so I'm going to type x minus 2 in parentheses, and then times x plus 3. Okay, so that's the left side of my equation. The right side of my equation is 0, because you know we can solve an equation by graphing both sides and finding the intersection. So here's the left side, the right side. For my window, you know, I can probably use a standard window, meaning negative 10 to 10. So the quick way to do that was zoom 6. Right, so now I have 10 tick marks in every direction. Right, the blue line or the blue parabola is the left side of my equation. The red line is the y equals 0. So the intersection, right, if I press second, trace, because above trace it says calc, we're going to calculate the intersection, which is number 5. Enter 3 times. You see how we get x equals 2? So that's saying when x equals 2, y equals 0. When x is 2, y is 0, which is one of the solutions that we had found previously. Right, here's my x equals 2. And then the other solution we found was x equals negative 3. Right, so here's x equals 2. And I guess this intersection is going to happen at x equals negative 3. So just to double check, second, trace, 5 for intersection. Now it says first curve, we press enter. It says second curve, we press enter. Now when it says guess, well, we already know this point is 2. So I'm going to move my cursor to the left side by just holding the arrow down until my cursor gets closer to the left side. Right? That's the point we don't know. I press enter. Look at that. X equals negative 3, y is 0. All right, so remember that was our answer, right? X equals negative 3. Right, so we were able to graph this, but we really didn't have to graph this, right, when we could just figure out what value of x is going to make this whole thing 0, right? Because we're saying what value of x will give me 0. So if I put in a positive 2, 2 minus 2 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. So x equals 2 is an answer. If I put in a negative 3 in here, well, negative 3 plus 3 is 0. 0 times anything is still 0. So negative 3 is a solution. So let's look at some of these practice problems, right? For the first one, it looks like, well, if I put a negative 4 in for x, the whole thing becomes 0. So I know x equals negative 4 is an answer. If I put in positive 5, the whole thing becomes 0, right? So the values of x that will give me 0, negative 4 plus 4 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. If I put in a 5 for x, 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. So these are my two answers, right? If I look at number 3, t equals negative 8 and t equals negative 3 are my answers, right? So if I put a negative 8 here, I get 0. A negative 3 here would give me 0, right? Let's look at number 2. All right, looks like x equals positive 1 and x equals negative 9 would all give me 0, right? Negative 9 plus 9 is 0. 1 plus negative 1 is 0. By the way, remember, I can always graph these like we did in the previous example. All right, now, number 4, again, w equals negative 2. Right? No big deal. But look at number 5. That's a little tricky. Okay, so let me just erase this answer because I want to write above number 5. All right, so for number 5, remember, think of this as A and B. Right? And remember the rule, right? If A times B equals 0, either A is 0 or B is 0. So you have to figure out what value would make A 0. If you're not sure by just looking at it, well, take each piece, take A and set it equal to 0. So 2x minus 1, if I set that equal to 0, if we solve for x, right, so you end up with 2x equals 1. And then if we divide everything by 2, you end up with x equals 1/2. Right? So 1/2 is one of my solutions. Right? If I place this 1/2 in for x, well, 2 times 1/2 is 1. 1 minus the 1 would give me 0. So x equals 1/2 is one of my solutions, right? If I put in 1/2 here and here, I'm going to get 0. Now there's another answer. Take this b, which is x plus 5, and set it equal to 0. Okay, now if I solve this for x, you get x equals negative 5. Right, so if I place this negative 5 in for x, I'm going to get 0. Now, by the way, I didn't actually have to set this equal to 0, right? You can just look at this and say, yeah, negative 5 is going to give me 0, just like we did in problem 1. We didn't actually set this piece equal to 0. We just looked at it and said, oh yeah, negative 4 or 5 would give me 0. Positive 1, negative 9 would give me 0. So I can just look at this and say 5, right? Or negative 5, because negative 5 plus 5 is 0. But the first part, that was a little tricky, right? Because you couldn't just put in a 1 or a 2 here. So we solved this for x by setting this equal to 0. So 2x minus 1 equals 0. X equals 1/2 is the value that makes this whole piece 0. All right, so I'm going to stop here. In the next video, we'll finish up 6 through 10.